Did you know the most famous car in movie history was supposedly built by a cocaine trafficker? That's the story people love to tell. The DeLorean time machine from Back to the Future, the gullwing doors, the raw stainless steel, the thing Doc Brown loaded with a flux capacitor built by a man the FBI caught red-handed with a suitcase of cocaine sitting on the table. I believed it too, for years. I actually said it out loud at a car meet once, real casual, like I was handing somebody a piece of forbidden knowledge. And the guy next to me just looked at me and went, "You know he was acquitted, right?" I did not know he was acquitted. I stood there holding a lukewarm coffee, feeling like an absolute idiot. So I went home and I started reading. And what I found was so much stranger, so much bigger than the version everybody repeats, that by the end of this, you're not gonna see this car the same way again. Because the drug bust everybody remembers, that's not even the crazy part. The crazy part is what the FBI wrote down on paper before they ever arrested him. The crazy part is the money that vanished into a company in Geneva, Switzerland, that may not have really existed. And the craziest part of all is that both things can be true at once. This man was framed by the United States government, and he might still have been guilty of something else entirely. Stick with me, because I'm going to show you exactly how a jury looked at the government's own evidence and decided the government built the crime. But to understand how big this fall was, you have to understand how high up this man started. And trust me, you are not ready for how high up he started. John Zachary DeLorean was not some fast-talking con man who wandered in off the street. He was the closest thing Detroit had to a rock star. Son of immigrant factory workers born in 1925, raised in one of the roughest corners of the city with an abusive, alcoholic father, and he clawed his way out on nothing but raw engineering brilliance. He landed at General Motors in the Pontiac division, and here's the first thing they don't tell you at the car meet. DeLorean is one of the fathers of the Pontiac GTO. The car, a lot of historians will tell you, launched the entire American muscle car era. And the name? He took it from the Ferrari 250 GTO, one of the most valuable cars ever made. That's the size this man dreamed at. From day one, he looked at Ferrari and thought, mine's gonna sit next to that. And he kept climbing, faster than anyone. By the age of 40, John DeLorean was a vice president at General Motors, the youngest general manager in the entire history of the corporation, head of Chevrolet, chief engineer at Pontiac. You need to understand what that meant in that era. General Motors wasn't just a car company. In 1960, it controlled around half of the entire American car market. This was the beating heart of the most powerful industry in the most powerful economy on planet Earth. And this kid from nowhere had a corner office at the top of it, with a private line to the future of American manufacturing. Now here's the tell, the thing that explains everything that comes after. He hated it. He grew his sideburns long, he loosened the tie, he lost weight, got a tan, reportedly had some work done, started dating actresses and models, and showed up to board meetings looking less like an auto executive and more like a man about to host a variety show. The stiff, gray men who ran GM could not stand him, and he could not stand them right back. He fought them over the 1971 GTO redesign, a version of his own car he reportedly couldn't stand. And in 1973, John DeLorean did the single most un-American executive thing imaginable. He quit. He walked away from one of the most powerful jobs in the country to go build his own car company from absolutely nothing. Think about the ego and the nerve that takes. That is being handed the keys to the kingdom and saying, no thanks, I'll build my own kingdom. I'll put my name on the door. And here's the promise I'll make you right now. That exact quality, the thing that made him great, the refusal to ever accept no, that's the same quality the FBI is eventually going to use to destroy him. Hold on to that, because the car he wanted to build was genuinely a thing of beauty. The DMC-12. And that number tells you the whole original dream. The 12 stood for a $12,000 price tag. A real, exotic-looking sports car that a middle-class American family could actually afford. Something to stare down Porsche and Ferrari on looks, at a fraction of the price. Stainless steel body panels you never had to paint, 75 thousandths of an inch thick, held on by over 300 exposed, polished screws. Gullwing doors that lifted toward the sky like the thing was about to leave the ground. Designed by Giorgetto Giugiaro, one of the greatest automobile designers who has ever lived. On paper, this was the American dream, wearing a hand-tailored Italian suit. But here's a rule that has never once been broken in the history of the automobile. Dreams cost money. And nobody bled money like John DeLorean. He raised a fortune to get started. Over $100 million through bank loans and one of the strangest celebrity investor lists you will ever hear. Johnny Carson, the king of American late-night television, wrote a check. Sammy Davis Jr. put money in. The country star Roy Clark invested. But here's the thing about building an actual car factory. Even a mountain of celebrity money isn't enough. DeLorean needed something bigger than a celebrity. He needed a government to bankroll him. And he went hunting for one. He had Puerto Rico on the hook at one point, with Puerto Rican officials literally sitting in a New York hotel room believing they were minutes away from signing the deal. And then, out of nowhere, the British government made him an offer so strange, so desperate, that it should have been the warning sign for everything to come. Because here's the backdrop, and this is where the story stops being a car story and becomes something much darker. The year is 1978. Northern Ireland is being torn apart by the Troubles, a vicious sectarian war, car bombs, soldiers patrolling the streets, one of the most dangerous places in all of Western Europe. Unemployment is brutal, and the British government is so desperate to create jobs and buy a little peace that they offer this flamboyant American a genuinely staggering pile of money to build his dream factory right in the middle of it, in Belfast. We're talking up to £100 million in grants and loans, channeled through what was then called the Northern Ireland Development Agency. Somewhere in the neighborhood of $120 million, more than half of the entire $200 million it took to launch the whole company, and the speed of it should tell you everything. The deal came together in about 46 days. Northern Ireland trade officials were reportedly so hungry for this thing that they physically elbowed past officials from the Republic of Ireland to lock it down before Dublin could. They built the plant on 72 acres of drained marshland in Dunmurry on the edge of Belfast. They hired around 2,500 local workers. And here's a detail that genuinely moves me. Protestant and Catholic working the same line, side by side, during the height of the Troubles, in the middle of a religious war. In that time and place, that was its own quiet miracle. For Britain, this was hope and paychecks in a war zone. For DeLorean, it was a state-of-the-art factory at a fraction of what Detroit would have cost him. There was just one problem left, the most important one. You still have to sell the cars. And this is where that beautiful math turns into a horror story. Remember the $12,000 dream price? The whole reason for the name? Gone. By the time the DMC-12 actually reached showrooms, it cost about $25,000. Let me make that number hit. The average new car in America at the time ran around $10,000. A fully loaded Corvette, a serious, fast American sports car, was about $18,000. So DeLorean had built a stainless steel spaceship that cost more than a Corvette, and there simply weren't enough people willing to pay it. And it got worse. The early cars had real quality problems. The manufacturing costs blew way past every estimate, and the currency exchange rates turned against him at the worst possible moment. DeLorean calculated he needed to sell somewhere between 10 and 12,000 cars a year just to break even. By the end of 1981, they had built roughly half that. Cars were piling up, unsold. Meanwhile, and this is important for what's coming, the man himself was living exactly like the star he had always wanted to be. A $500,000 salary, an expense account to match, a life that looked nothing like a company circling the drain. Now pay very close attention, because right here is where the second crime gets planted, the one nobody talks about, and it's going to come roaring back at the end. Part of the engineering on the DMC-12 had been contracted out to Lotus, the brilliant British sports car company run by the legendary Colin Chapman. Standard move. Lotus was world class, but the money for that work, tens of millions of dollars of it, wasn't paid straight across. It was routed through a mysterious holding company based in Geneva, Switzerland, called GPD Services, allegedly run by a couple of Colin Chapman's old friends. And when investigators and receivers later went looking for where all that money actually went, their conclusion was chillingly simple. It had vanished, disappeared. Tens of millions of dollars gone into a company in Geneva, Switzerland, and nobody could say exactly where. Remember that. I promise you it comes back. And when it does, it changes who you think this man really was. By early 1982, the whole empire is caving in. The British government, now led by Margaret Thatcher, who was never a fan of this deal in the first place, has run out of patience and money. The company is drowning. $17 million in debt, with total losses that would eventually blow past $200 million and fields full of stainless steel cars nobody was buying. And it is at that exact moment, the lowest, most desperate point of this man's entire life, that a drug deal materializes out of thin air. Remember that word. Desperation. Because the entire case against John DeLorean is built on it, brick by brick. Let me stop the story for a second, because I want you to actually stand inside this man's shoes, not just watch him from across the room. You gave up everything. You quit the best job in the industry, the one people spend their whole lives chasing. Your literal name is on the side of the building. 2,500 people in the middle of a war zone are feeding their families because of you. Johnny Carson's money is in this. The British government's money is in this. Your entire identity, the whole story of the kid who clawed out of Detroit and beat the men who doubted him, all of it is in this. And it is publicly, humiliatingly slipping through your fingers in real time. Now picture someone stepping up to you in that precise moment and offering you a way to save all of it. Every rational part of you that should say no gets drowned out by the part screaming to protect what you built. That's not a hardened criminal making a cold calculation. That's a human being at the absolute end of his rope. And if you have ever, even once, signed something you shouldn't have because you were cornered and out of road, you already understand this trap better than the FBI ever admitted in court. Because, and this is the hinge the entire story turns on, John DeLorean did not go looking for a cocaine deal. The cocaine deal came looking for him. Enter FBI informant James Hoffman. On paper, a neighbor, a former pilot. But scratch the surface, and here is who he really was. A convicted drug smuggler who had flipped and was now working as an informant for the FBI, trying to carve down his own prison sentence. That is the man who made the first move. Hoffman knew DeLorean's company was sinking. He knew the man was desperate for fast money. So he reached out to DeLorean, someone he barely knew, a man with zero criminal record, and dangled the one lifeline a drowning man can't slap away. Then the machine came to life. Undercover FBI agents stepped in, posing as members of a Colombian cocaine cartel. The deal they built was worth about $24 million in cocaine. The pitch, stripped down, was devastatingly simple. Put your money into this, and your company lives. And according to DeLorean's own defense, he only kept walking down that road after threats were made against his family. On October 19th, 1982, they sprang the trap and arrested him. And here's the piece that made it feel airtight to the entire world. There was surveillance footage. DeLorean in a hotel room, undercover agents around him, a briefcase of cocaine open on the table. He allegedly looked at it and called it better than gold. That clip ran on every news broadcast in the country. In a single evening, John DeLorean went from automotive legend to the most famous accused drug trafficker in America. Guilty, on tape, in the court of public opinion. Case closed. Except it wasn't. And this is the reveal the car meet crowd never gets to. Because when this thing finally reached an actual courtroom, the FBI's own paperwork detonated in their hands. One of their agents, FBI Special Agent Benedict Tisa, took the stand. And DeLorean's attorney, a sharp, relentless lawyer named Howard Weitzman, began pulling out the Bureau's internal memos and reading them into the record. And one of those memos, describing the plan to arrest DeLorean, actually called it, their words, an appealing scenario. A reporter sitting in that courtroom wrote that the FBI's memos read like proposals for a movie script. Weitzman paced that floor and accused the government point blank of choreographing this thing, orchestrating it, creating it out of nothing. And Agent Tisa's answer from the witness stand was 5 words. We did not create the conspiracy. That was the entire trial, distilled into one exchange. The lawyer says, you people wrote a screenplay and cast a desperate man in the lead. The agent says, we did not. And 12 ordinary Americans had to decide which of those 2 sentences was the truth. They did not rush it. 6 men, 6 women. They began deliberating on August 9th, 1984. And on August 16th, they walked back into that room and delivered a verdict that stunned the country. Not guilty. Every single count, on the grounds of entrapment. They decided the informant started it, the agents chased it, and DeLorean had been, in the words of his own defense, play acting a role that had been written for him by the very people who needed him to perform it. It became one of the most famous entrapment verdicts in American legal history. It was even an early, high-profile test of brand new Justice Department guidelines, rules that had been written after the Abscam scandal specifically to stop the FBI from doing exactly this kind of aggressive, manufactured sting. He walked out of that Los Angeles courthouse a free man. And here comes the gut punch that the popular version of the story just erases. There was nothing left to walk back to, because 1 week after his arrest, 1 week, way back in October of 1982, nearly 2 years before any jury heard a single word, the DeLorean Motor Company had already filed for bankruptcy. The British shut down the Dunmurry factory. Around 2,500 workers lost their jobs. In total, only about 9,000 DeLoreans were ever built. The arrest alone did all of that, just the accusation. So by the time 12 strangers formally agreed that the government had manufactured the case against him, the company that the case had annihilated was already dead and cold. He won the verdict, and he had already lost absolutely everything. Now, the twist I promised you at the very beginning. Because being entrapped by the FBI does not automatically make a man a saint, and this is where the whole story gets genuinely, uncomfortably complicated. Remember that money? The tens of millions that simply disappeared through GPD services, that mysterious holding company in Geneva, Switzerland. After beating the drug charges, DeLorean walked almost straight into a second courtroom, this time to face fraud charges. He was accused of essentially skimming millions of dollars out of his own company and away from the very investors and government that had trusted him. Auditors who examined the books, including the accounting firm Arthur Andersen, couldn't reconcile where the money had gone. And those legal fights dragged on, in various forms, for the better part of the next 2 decades. So sit with the real answer to who this man was, because it's not clean and it's not comfortable. He was not the innocent lamb the entrapment verdict might make him sound. And he was not the cartel drug lord the news footage made him look like. The truth is stranger than either cartoon. John DeLorean was very likely a man the United States government framed for one crime, while a completely separate set of very real questions about missing millions followed him to his grave. Wronged and guilty at the same time. That's not a Hollywood ending. That's a human being. And then the final turn, the one that would be too on the nose if it were fiction. In 1985, the year after the acquittal, with the company already a corpse in the ground, a filmmaker named Robert Zemeckis was building a movie and needed a time machine. Here's a detail I love. The machine was originally going to be a refrigerator until they worried children would climb into fridges trying to copy it and get trapped. So they needed something else, something that looked like it came from the future. And they picked the strangest, most beautiful failure in the history of the automobile, the DeLorean DMC-12. Back to the Future became one of the most beloved films ever made, and it took this scandal-soaked, bankrupt, stainless steel flop and made it immortal. The company was already dead. The car will now live forever. So the next time you're standing at a car meet, holding a lukewarm coffee, and somebody leans in and tells you, real casual, like it's forbidden knowledge, that the most famous car in movie history was built by a drug dealer, you can be the person I wish I had been that day. You can tell them the whole strange truth, that a jury read the FBI's own memos, the ones that read like a screenplay, and decided the only people in that entire story who actually wrote a script were the ones holding the badges.